W. Edwards Deming said, if you can't describe what you are doing as a process, you don't know what you're doing. You might be surprised to hear this, but it was my guidance counselor that suggested I pursue industrial engineering in college. After working in a quality control lab, I knew I didn't want to pursue a pure science discipline, and I also thought a business education could wait until graduate school. My guidance counselor phrased it as the most business-related of the engineering disciplines. Sounded good enough for me, so I went for it. Almost 3 decades have passed since I made that decision, and I can honestly say it turned out pretty well. I will always wonder if I would have been better off pursuing investment banking, but i.e. industrial engineering fit really well with my personality because 2 large parts of it are problem solving, like any engineering discipline really, and process improvement. The latter is where we will spend our time today. What is process improvement and why is it important? I really don't think I need to bore y'all by answering these 2 questions. Thomas Edison said, there's a way to do it better. Find it. If that doesn't resonate with you at all, then this video probably isn't for you or the channel in general. When thinking about process improvement, what is the goal though? Not to split hairs on vernacular, but my view is that the goal for any process improvement initiative should be to eliminate waste. The benefit of reducing waste will be using less resources. The resource might be your own or your staff's time, working capital, machine time, and so on. Ultimately, reducing waste should lead to increased profits. In subsequent parts of this series, we will discuss how to remove waste from processes. However, before we can learn about how to remove waste, it probably makes sense to learn about the different types of waste. In the world of process improvement, there are usually 7 to 8 types of waste discussed. The 7 I will focus on are overproduction, inventory, defects, motion, overprocessing, waiting, and overhandling. For the most part, these wastes are at least somewhat self-explanatory, especially in the context of a manufacturing firm. Regardless, I think it is instructive to share real-life examples for each of these. I will use 2 examples. 1, manufacturing, and 2, a lawn mowing service. These are all relatively simple and straightforward businesses or processes to understand. At least, that is the hope. In describing these processes, I will use terms like output, which might mean something that is manufactured, or it could mean some sort of service being performed. Output can be tangible or intangible. Inputs are similar to outputs, though you probably already have surmised that inputs are used by or in the process. Upstream is a part of the process that occurs before the process in question, with downstream being a part of the process occurring after the process in question. These upstream or downstream processes could occur within your company or external to it. The manufacturing process will be making a car, albeit a much simplified version. Welcome to Nick's Auto Manufacturing Company of the World, where we make the finest autos. We hope you like black though, because if you don't, you're going to be out of luck. That's our only option, just like on the original Model T. Now, how do we make these fine autos here at Nick's? Well, the automobile is made up of a frame, a front and rear axle assembly, which due to our engineering prowess, we were able to make these interchangeable. I know that's pretty impressive, right? We have the engine compartment, the interior cabin, and the trunk. Now I know the engine compartment and the trunk look like they might be interchangeable, but I mean, come on guys, we're not geniuses here. There's a limit to how smart we are about auto manufacturing. Regardless, here is the process that we follow here at Nick's. First, we install the front or rear axle assembly, and then the other piece. It moves down the line to have the engine, interior, and trunk installed. So let's install the engine, the interior cabin, and the trunk. And there you have it. One of Nick's fine autos. In future segments of the series, we will introduce concepts such as takt time and one-piece flow. Stay tuned. The service scenario will be a lawn mowing service. These wastes were conceived within the context of manufacturing, so some of the types of waste won't seem as common to a service process, but believe me, they are still there. The first type of waste, inventory. Inventory is a waste in and of itself, but it is also a byproduct of other types of waste. As a lean practitioner, all I would need to do to identify a wasteful process would be to walk the plant floor and look for piles and piles of parts. These large piles of parts would almost always signify there was a waste at some point upstream from the current process. There's one analogy that I have heard that has stuck with me through the years. It is the concept of a river. Whenever the water level is high, rocks aren't visible and it is safe for vessels to traverse. Opposite story when the water line is low. If the water line is low and it is preventing travel, there are 2 different mindsets to explore. First, add water somehow to raise the water level. The other mindset would be to eliminate the rocks. As it relates to a process, manufacturing or otherwise, water represents inventory. Adding inventory to a process helps to hide any waste or deficiencies within the process. The easier method, but more costly, is to increase inventory so that the waste or the rocks remains hidden. The more challenging method, but the one that will lead to improved financial performance, is to remove the rocks. Removing the proverbial rock can feel counterintuitive though. If a downstream process is starved for inputs, it feels natural to increase production in preceding parts of the process. It might feel natural, but that is just adding water to hide a rock. In other words, adding waste, not removing it. With that preamble, let's move on to our examples. For the manufacturing process, an example of excess inventory would be too many wheels getting delivered to the production line. In this example, wheels and tires are purchased from a vendor and delivered to the manufacturer. Now, if you pay attention to the process here, you can see that front and rear axle assemblies are getting delivered to the line much more quickly than they are being consumed by the manufacturing process. Now, of course, this ties up working capital, and that's a negative issue, but perhaps even more harmful is, what if the front and rear axle assemblies, the specifications get changed? All of a sudden, these front and rear axle assemblies cannot be used. That's a huge waste of money. As it relates to lawn mowing, perhaps the company purchased too many string trimmers.
Let's do a quick test to see if it runs. Okay.
Up next, overproduction. Overproduction occurs when a greater quantity of output is produced than is needed by downstream processes and or the customer. This might be because one machine produces parts more quickly than another, or because work isn't divided evenly. As with many wastes, this will create excess inventory. It is not uncommon that I hear comments that immediately make me think there's a potential overproduction scenario at play. Something to the effect of, that is our most expensive or most critical piece of machinery, so we have to keep it running. That feels like the right decision. I really do believe that. But this is another instance in which our intuition would be wrong. For the manufacturing process, an example of overproduction is the front and rear axle assemblies getting installed more quickly than the engine, interior, and trunk. Now, as you can see here, we install the front and rear assembly again. It moves on to the next line. And as you can see, at this next assembly, it's a little bit more complex, and so things slow down. Now, while front and rear axle assemblies are continuing to getting installed, we've got a delay here, and because of that, it's adding inventory to the process. For the lawn mowing business, an example of overproduction might be mowing the yard more frequently than had been agreed to. Defects. Another obvious example of waste is defects. I would encourage you to take a very broad and expansive view of that term. This could involve time, resources, inputs, even customer satisfaction. It is important to note that in many cases, defects are just the symptom and not the cause. In the manufacturing scenario, a glaring example of a defect might be failing to install the interior cabin. Even though this is a relatively simple manufacturing process, if someone is rushing, it might be easy to forget one of the components here in the line. Now, if that auto is attempted to be delivered to a customer, I don't think they're going to be too happy because there's no interior cabin. For the mowers, property damage would be an obvious example. Motion. Have you ever been trying to find something and you search through many drawers? That is a great example of wasted motion, and one I find myself doing quite often, much to the annoyance of my wife. I actually think that motion is one of the hardest wastes to fully account for. Considering my background, I will often find myself analyzing various processes I need to perform. One such example is making a protein shake. I add 2 different ingredients plus water to make a protein shake. What I found is that I was adding excess motion to the process. So for this protein shake, I have protein powder, and I put a little powdered peanut butter in there as well. Not only for a little bit of a nutritional kick, but also for taste. So the process that I used to follow is I would add the powdered peanut butter, put the lid back on, Then here is where the optimized process was. What I would do is I would scoop the protein into the scooper, and I would pour the protein into the shake. Now you can see that I'm still holding the shaker. I'm not touching the protein canister at all. And the old process that I would follow is I would set this down, I would pick up the canister as well and put on the lid. Well, actually, a better process is, since I'm already holding this and I'm not holding or touching the protein canister, to eliminate wasted motion and overhandling, what I should do is keep this protein shaker, put this lid on, since I'm already holding the shaker, shake it, and now put the lid onto the protein canister. Not a major change, but I think it's a good example to highlight how often or the prevalence of overhandling and wasted motion in simple processes. As it relates to our auto manufacturing company, let's look back at how I assembled the front and rear axle assemblies. I pick up the frame, bring one axle to the frame and install it, reposition my grip, and then install the other assembly. There is wasted motion here because I remove the frame from the production line, bring the assemblies to the frame, and then replace the frame on the production line. Could this process be improved? What if the frame were delivered to the line upside down? Well, in that case, I could leave the frame on the production line, bring a front or rear axle assembly directly to the frame and install it, and then the other side, without having to move the frame really at all. Then I would flip the entire assembly and it would move down to the next station in the production line. Now, we can definitely take our efforts to reduce motion too far. Have you ever seen these memes? There are elements of efficiency here, but I think many of us, especially the women, might think this is going a bit too far. That's a nice segue to our example on the lawn mowing service. In this example, the lawnmower drives past a gas station on his way to a customer's house. Once he gets to the customer's house and starts mowing it, he runs out of gas. He must now backtrack to the gas station. It would have been much more efficient if he had stopped at the gas station on the way there. There's a difficult challenge here though. When should the mower stop for gas? He surely passed numerous gas stations on the way. He shouldn't stop at every gas station, nor should he refill after every yard. This example illustrates the need to study the process. Only by studying the process and determining how much mowing time a tank of gas lasts can a process be determined to help minimize the scenarios where the mower runs out of gas and thus creates wasteful motion. Overprocessing. Overprocessing is another type of waste that can be hard to identify. Part of the reason for this is that it often feels intuitive to perform this processing, even though it might not be the most efficient choice. Here's an example. Let's say you are having your website redesigned. The design called for a homepage, about us page, capabilities page, testimonials page, and a contact us page. Nothing too crazy there. As the web designer, you see what other folks are doing on their websites and, with good intentions, add a blog to the customer's site without asking. Adding this additional page would be considered over-processing. Is that really so bad though? It depends on your perspective, I guess, but also that of your customer. In some circumstances, going the extra mile, if you will be well received by the customer, and the goodwill earned will be worth the resource usage that you likely will not get compensated for. In our example, perhaps the customer didn't even think about adding a blog and is thankful that the web designer thought of it and included it without even mentioning anything. They still didn't get paid for it, but perhaps it will be worth it for the web designer anyway. On the other hand, maybe the customer didn't want a blog page and wants the web designer to remove it. There are arguments for and against, but at the end of the day, it is best to take the time to fully understand the demands and requirements of your customers and do just that. Prior to agreeing to a scope of work, if you have any hesitations about the customer skipping out or not thinking of something, now is the time to bring that up to the customer and of course document it. We always want to exceed customer expectations, but let's do that by listening to what is important to them, not making assumptions or judgments as to what we think should be important. As it relates to our manufacturing process, watch at the end of the video where I press all the pieces together again firmly. That is overprocessing and can be harmful. In the real world, what if you go back to an already tightened bolt or screw and try to tighten it again, and in turn, you strip the threads? You were just trying to make sure it was tight, but now it is damaged. I completely agree that the pieces need to be installed firmly, but quality checks should be designed into the process such that processing of that type is not performed at the end. For the lawn mowing business, what if the mower decided he would bag the clippings? This will take more time. I will admit, it does lead to a more pristine yard, but on the other hand, leaving the clippings behind are a source of water and nutrients for the unclipped grass. Because of this, it would probably be better just to mulch the clippings while mowing than to bag them. Waiting. I know this might be shocking to hear to the parents out there, but I have 2 school-aged kids and, get this, I have to wait on them from time to time. Hard to believe, I know. While waiting, it is hard to feel anything other than that time is wasting away. We all have to wait sometimes. Sometimes it is a welcome break. Other times it is frustrating or annoying. As a business owner or manager, it sometimes feels like our employees are taking a break when they should be working on a task or a project. Part of what might be at work here is called the Parkinson Principle. The Parkinson Principle states that work expands so as to fill the time available for its completion. If a certain amount of work is assigned, as well as a deadline, then the outcome most consistent with human nature is for the work to get accomplished at or near the deadline. That might be why we see our employees not as busy as we think they should be. In reality, they are just managing their workload to the deadline given. Is that their fault or ours?
The manufacturing case is easy to provide an example for. If we install the front and rear assemblies as usual and move it to the next line, if there are no engine, interior cabins, or trunks, waiting will be experienced.
For the lawnmower, what if the lawnmower takes a call before starting mowing? Even if that phone call is work-related, it still represents waste. I do not mean to imply that the mower should take a phone call while mowing. That would be noisy and perhaps dangerous. But the customer is not paying for the mower to take that phone call. Because of that, it is waste, or at the very least, non-value added time. The concept of non-value added time will be explored more fully in part 2 of this series. Here's the thing though, waiting is sometimes the lesser of 2 evils, or at least 2 wastes. Let's say there are 2 processes involved in making a widget. It takes 1 minute to perform process A and 1.5 minutes to perform process B. If the production rate of 1.5 minutes, the slower of the 2 processes, is fast enough to satisfy customer or downstream demands, then it would be better for process A to produce for 60 seconds and wait for 30 seconds than to simply keep producing. Otherwise, excess inventory would be created. Overhandling. Now, I'm no gourmet or master chef, but I do enjoy grilling. My family's favorite tends to be steaks and corn. After flipping the corn or steaks, I often find myself bringing the tongs in with me. If you know me, then you won't be surprised to hear that I often leave the tongs inside when I go back out to flip again. Even if I remembered the tongs each and every time, this is still an example of overhandling or transportation waste. In addition to creating wasted motion if I forgot them inside, I could drop them and then have to clean them. Well, I'd have to clean them if my wife saw me drop them, I guess. The point here is that the tool should be located as close to the point of use as practical and kept there. In the manufacturing setting, we see the waste of overhandling commonly due to poor plant layout. Even with great plant layout, sometimes the processes are different enough that perfect flow is not possible. For example, consider a manufacturing process that has 4 different potential operations: machining, drilling, threading, and coating. Most of the time, parts follow that exact sequence. However, some of the time the part has to get drilled a second time, and that must occur after threading. This is an example of transportation waste. To eliminate the waste, another drilling station would be required. Well, that is just one option. The more enlightened option would be to analyze and improve the process so that all of the drilling could in fact be performed prior to the threading operation. As it relates to the production environment inside Nick's world of wheels, notice how I moved the engine, interior, and trunk before installing them? What's more, I picked up the frame to install these sections instead of leaving the frame on the production line.
The more efficient process would be to deliver the engine and the trunk compartments in the orientation in which they need to be installed. Then you can install the engine, interior cabin, and trunk directly from the stock locations and not have to reorient or move these pieces here. For example, install the engine compartment, next move down to the interior cabin, and finally the trunk. Some might argue this is actually wasted motion instead of overhandling, but it was Mark Twain that said continuous improvement is better than delayed perfection. Who cares if it's this type of waste or another type of waste? Let's just improve the dang process and move on.
For our lawn mowing business, the best example here is for inefficient routing from house to house. Final thoughts. When it comes to identifying waste and making operational improvements, I clearly suffered from a bit of ego. I would read through coursework or listen to process improvement experts and think that I had all the tools. Now all I had to do was apply them. I was at the point where I didn't even know enough to understand how little I actually knew. Where the ego comes in is that simply knowing the tools is only the very beginning of the battle. There are so many unique situations and nuance that the only way to get really good at this skill is to use it and practice it a lot. The examples we discussed today are very simple, unrealistically simple actually. In our workplaces, we will encounter much more challenging processes that don't have a cookie cutter solution. And making matters worse, adding in all the folks that will be resistant to change. I hope you enjoyed this initial segment on the different types of waste. Stay tuned to the channel for part 2 of the series. Imagine taking over as CEO after hearing the board describe the company as being a well-oiled machine, and instead, this is what you find.